Okay, since we did not get to say anything to you guys on Friday, hopefully you're enjoying your July 4th weekend. Fireworks and hot dogs and picnics and all sorts of stuff I don't like. So, I don't eat hot dogs, you know this. Well, when it comes down to it, there's no real rhyme or reason why we did this one this week. Because AJ doesn't like themes. So, what we're going to do in this situation is we're going to put two time travel movies against one another. And we're going to find out what happens when 12 Monkeys battles Looper. AJ, take it away.
Obviously, these aren't just time travel movies, they are Bruce Willis time travel
Yes.
movies. Where in both cases, he has to go back in time to basically stop something horrible from happening to the world.
Correct.
So we have Terry Gilliam's take on it and Ryan Johnson's take on it. And though they are totally different and pretty much have nothing in common except that Bruce Willis goes back in time and has to stop something horrible from happening to the world, I thought it was appropriate anyway.
Alright, fair enough.
We're going to start with the much beloved 12 Monkeys. People love 12 Monkeys. It got a couple of Oscar nominations. So, obviously Brad Pitt got nominated for supporting actor. Looking at it, you would think it got in, the other nomination would be for production design.
Yeah.
It was costumes, which is weird to me, but
Very strange.
those are the two Oscar nominations it got, as far as that's concerned. Sadly for Looper, that's the last we have to talk about Oscars in this video.
So wrong.
So 12 Monkeys starts in 2035, and James Cole, who is Bruce Willis, is basically a prisoner, and he has decided to do a volunteer job he did not volunteer for, which is to go back. In 1996, I think it's 1997 actually, he has to go back to 96 to prevent it. I think. But anyway, in 96 or 97, a virus is going to break out and kill almost the entire world's population, and kill 5 billion people. And animals will rule the earth again. So he has to travel back in time to stop this from happening. Stop the vials with the viruses getting to their locations and doing what they do. Trouble is they first off accidentally, this time machine is not reliable. They end up sending him back to 1990, where he ends up with a doctor who is Madeline Stowe, and he ends up in a mental institution and befriending Jeffrey Goins, who is a complete and utter psychopath, which is Brad Pitt. And he basically has to figure out, once he realizes he's in 1990, he's got to figure out how to contact the people from the future to tell them he's got to get to the right year, and of course, trying to convince the people of this is how he ends up in a mental institution. But eventually, they finally get him to 1996, but not before accidentally sending him to World War I. Which is a major plot point later, though, so convenient enough. And it basically turns out that Jeffrey is now out of the mental institution and has started the army of the 12 Monkeys, who released the virus on the Earth. And in an odd twist of fate, it turns out that Cole is the guy who accidentally planted the idea in Jeffrey's mind to start that. So now he's got all kinds of different cause to stop this from happening. While being plagued by a flashback of him seeing a man killed in an airport in his childhood. And then from then on, it's 150% a Terry Gilliam movie. I want to start by talking about Bruce Willis's performance, because that's something that's not talked about enough in his movies. Because he's mainly known as an action star that can only do so much, but you have his fans out there who will defend him and tell you up front, Bruce Willis is very underrated as an actor. It's also worth noting real quick that this is based off a French short from 1962. That was like 28 minutes long, which I haven't seen, so I don't know exactly how much they took and how much is its own thing, but that's where the original source. The interesting thing about Willis's performance is he's got a lot to do, because for the first half hour or so, or 45 minutes even, it's almost strictly a physical performance. Because there's a lot of action involved in doing, like, getting into suits and then going from place to place and going through war trenches and then being totally sedated, whether he's running around or has to be totally drugged out and drooling on himself. Quite literally many times. It's pretty gross. But he totally, completely sells it. But then, the other half, when he starts to... There's a lot of interesting places this character goes. There's a really good scene when he finds Madeline Stowe again in 1996, and he's in the back of her car, and he hears Blueberry Hill on the radio, and he's never really heard this century's music before, because he's from 2035, and which is pretty much a wasteland. So he has this really nice moment where it's just hearing Blueberry Hill on the radio in this car is like the happiest he's ever been in his life, or at least for a really long time. And then Wonderful World comes on, which is basically the movie's theme, more or less, in an ironic way, obviously. But then there's those moments where, as the movie progresses, we and he start to wonder if maybe he might just be insane. There's the really funny scene where he's just jumping up and down in, like, a small lake. And then the scenes where he's starting to try to come to terms with whether, what's real and what isn't, or whether he's insane, or whether the world's basically about to end. A whole bunch of things. And it's a really good, not really talked about performance. Obviously, he was totally overshadowed by Brad Pitt, because Brad Pitt has the really, really, really flashy is putting it mildly. In fact, let's talk about Jeffrey Goins right now. We see 3 different kinds of Jeffreys. Really 2, but... Well, we'll go through it one at a time. The first time we see Jeffrey, he's laying in a chair, and he's got his shirt pulled over his head, and he's just sitting there. And then when he's called to introduce James to everybody, we see he's got, like, the stubble, he's got the weird shave marks in his head, and he's got the one really crazy eye. And everything he says and everything he does is either really twitchy and really nervous, or just really... And he talks in really rapid-fire rants. And there's just this really great scene. Every scene with him in the institution is fantastic, because he just goes nonstop. And I read somewhere that one of the ways they got them to do that was, I guess he was a really, really heavy smoker at the time, and Terry Gilliam took his cigarettes away. And that's part of where the performance came from.
That'll do it.
Like, when he's trying to think of something, he starts pounding his head, and when he gets in trouble, he just he looks like a wounded puppy, and then cooperates. There's the one moment I love where he gets scolded for yelling, so his reaction to it is to throw himself against a cage, but then cooperate. But then as it goes on, when he's out of the institution, and he's got, like, his long hair, and he's got there's the scene at his father's party where he's in, like, the suit, and kind of looks like he does an interview with the vampire. I think this was just the year after, I think, actually. Where he does we don't know if he remembers Cole or not, and he's kind of doing the oblivious thing, but then when he recognizes who Cole is, he goes right back into the Jeffrey we knew at the institution. The nervousness and the rapid-fire dialogue comes back when he talks about his plan, and how he's basically... At this point in the movie, Jeffrey has basically become a self-appointed supervillain. And he's totally and completely out of his fucking mind, and Brad Pitt owns this completely. I always loved when he especially gets hardcore at the end, when the plan is starting to form, and they're getting ready to go do what they need to do, which, of course, a twist will reveal what that is. And he has to go through his whole plan. He's saying, like, Madeline Stowe's there, and she's trying to get the message out, and his response is just, hey, that's my psychiatrist, don't worry about her. And he has the line where, once he's, like, really and totally lost it, he's talking about how he gives a guy something to do, And he says, now, I need you to go do that, and I need you to go do it now. And if you forget anything, like anything at all, I'm going to have you shaved, sterilized, and destroyed. It's just, you can't take your eyes off the Scarecrow at all. Now, I understand, maybe some people might have a problem with it because he's just so all over the place and out of control and just really, really as over the top as you can possibly go. Jeffrey Goins was Tyler Durden before Tyler Durden. And crazier. Just those little moments like when he's watching the Marx Brothers in the institution, and he does he's talking about how they're playing the movie Monkey Business, and obviously there's that monkey symbolism all over the place, which we'll get more into. And now that we talked about, but yeah, I find it really, really kind of inspired that the Academy actually recognized this performance. He won the Golden Globe, so I mean, I know that's, you know, he was Brad Pitt in the mid-90s, you know. Golden Globe probably just seemed right, but the Academy actually nominated this performance is really, really interesting in retrospect, because I don't think it's something they'd go for today.
Probably not.
A self-appointed supervillain in an institution in a Terry Gilliam movie. There's no way the Academy would go for that today.
Nope.
So we watch this movie and we bask in that while we can. It's also got quite a cast list. Madeline Stowe is really good here. She's one of those actresses that never really got like recognition, but she's been consistently good through her career, even though she's done some not all that recognizable or acknowledgeable movies. We have Frank Gorshin, who is like the main doctor.
Yes.
There's an early role for Chris Maloney as a cop. David Morse, who is a scientist that works for Jeffrey's father, who's basically may or may not be important to the plot. He comes up a couple of times at the book signing or whatever that was, or after the lecture, and in the laboratory, but we don't realize then just how important his character is. Obviously, Jeffrey's father is played by Christopher Plummer, doing some very interesting hospitable Southerner thing. He's not in it very much, but it's very interesting to watch him in this type of role. Now, and of course, you know, there's sometimes it can be tiresome in other movies unless you're doing it right, but I think this movie works with it really well. Symbolism and foreshadowing everywhere. Which in a time travel movie, you know, is particularly common because that's kind of, you know, what that is. There's a really interesting scene where they're at a Hitchcock festival, a theater that's playing Hitchcock movies 24 hours a day. They're watching Vertigo and the Birds, and of course this is when they're going to the airport and the big climax is coming, so they've got to get into disguises. And naturally, Madeline Stowe takes on a blonde wig. And of course, Hitchcock movies were known for their blondes, like Kim Novak in Vertigo and Tippi Hedren in The Birds. And to go with this past week's review video, Grace Kelly in Rear Window and To Catch a Thief and all those other ones. Now, there is the twist that apparently, not surprising, this movie's ending wasn't popular with the studio, but unfortunate for them, Gilliam had final cut. The movie has a huge downer ending, more or less, where obviously Versus is extremely spoilery, so you should know that by now. It turns out, obviously, that Jeffrey's army of the 12 monkeys was basically one big misdirection. And Jeffrey's big plan this whole time was to release all the animals from the zoo and put his father in a cage. Just to make a point for the animal-loving thing. So, in actuality, the doctor that we've been seeing periodically, played by David Morse, is actually the one that's bringing the virus in. And when the small child version of Bruce Willis was seeing somebody shot in an airport in his youth, he was seeing his future self being shot by the cops when he was trying to stop David Morse from leaving with the virus. And the mysterious blonde that was chasing after the man obviously was Madeline Stowe chasing after him. And the movie ends with young James looking up to the sky as David Morse takes off on the plane with the virus. And in a stroke of genius, as we see the virus going off and we fade to white and then black, the credits roll with a wonderful world black. So basically we're all doomed. Thank you, David Morse.
He got his, though.
But I do love that they had no choice but to stick with that ending. So, it seems more Gilliam-like to go with the, not exactly, happiness and all that. Because all of Gilliam's movies have this this is one of the great things about this movie. It's got, when you look at, like, Brazil or Baron Munchausen or whatever, even the Monty Python movies, I guess, Terry Gilliam manages to create this world that you can't imitate. So many people try. I know so many people try, but you can't imitate Gilliam's world. It is his own thing. And you just are enriched with these images you never ever thought you would see, or never even could comprehend that you could see, because what he's throwing at you is just so out there. And it's got, all of his, things, like the tilted camera angles, the weird characters that pop in and out, like, the philosopher at the institution that wears a black suit but with white slippers. The homeless guy who basically acts as the voice in Bruce Willis's head. Those characters just have Gilliam written all over them. But one of the interesting things, probably the most interesting aspect of this movie is when it actually starts to get ambiguous as to whether or not James Cole is actually crazy or not. Because obviously we see him in the future at the beginning. We see this whole process. We see the time machine. But there's also a lot, like, an endless number of parallels between 2035 and 1996, which are interesting to point out on multiple viewings. But I think one of the most interesting things this movie does is the ambiguity regarding, we, along with him himself, start to wonder whether or not maybe he is just, a patient at a mental institution, and the year 2035 and everything that happened is just in his head, and there's not actually going to be a virus that takes the world out. And the more things go on, the more he starts to believe, maybe not. But then, of course, obviously it starts to get proven right with the random clues. Like, there's this ongoing thing about a kid who's stuck in a hole in the ground. And then he says, just nonchalantly, I remember that being on the news when I was a kid, because obviously it's the year that he's a kid. And he says it's actually just a hoax, the kid's hiding out in a barn somewhere. And when we find out that that's actually true, she totally starts to believe it. But now that she's believing everything he's saying, well, maybe not. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe, that kid and I saw the same TV show about somebody in a barn. Reaching for straws, but he really wants to believe that it's not going to happen. And then there's that question all the way up to the end as to whether or not the virus is actually going to break out or not. She also, that's where World War II comes in. World War I comes in. She actually sees a picture of him from the war that was taken. And he's got the antique bullet in his leg from when that happened. And also the voicemail message that we learned was her, even though you can kind of tell at the beginning a little bit. It's still a major plot point when it's revealed that she left the message just as a joke, but it's actually a giant plot point that proves that he really is time traveling. And obviously you have the monkey symbolism everywhere. Like, we get a lot of shots of monkeys when they're breaking the animals out of the zoo. There's when the kid in the hole was on the news, they send down a monkey with like a roast beef sandwich down there, and everybody's talking about that. Like I said, in the institution, they're watching the Marx Brothers movie. There's a whole lot to take in this movie, and it provides. I'm actually surprised it's 2 hours and 10 minutes. I'm kind of surprised it was able to fit it all in that time, including setting up the whole world that it's set in. So, yeah, and like I said, maybe if you've seen enough movies, that twist might not be much of a twist for you, but it was I remember it being effective the first time I saw it. So, yes, I like the downer ending. I like how it's the whole scope of it. The performances are great. Which is interesting because you get so caught up in the world that a sci-fi movie is set in. Generally, the performances aren't talked about, but to actually have, I can't express this enough, to actually have an Oscar-nominated performance that's really over the top in a sci-fi movie by Terry Gilliam is very interesting. And a very worthy performance at that. Now we go on to Looper, which is only a couple years old. It's actually not even a couple years old. This September it will be. It's also got a pretty elaborate setup. Unfortunately, it's one of those movies kind of like Inception, where even though it's necessary, because otherwise you'll have no idea what's going on, we have to have a huge set of expositional narration to tell us everything that's going on. Which, yeah, if you see the movie over and over again, can get a little tedious. Like I said, for movies like this, you do need exposition otherwise, because you got a whole thing to set up. So, that the exposition stuff for some rewatches is just a sacrifice that has to be made, so you can enjoy it and know. So, if for some reason you don't know, basically the setup is Joseph Gordon-Levitt is a looper who is somebody because time travel is illegal, so basically criminals in the past, criminals in the future send criminals back to the past that need to be killed, and loopers are there waiting for them at just the right spot, and they kill them and dispose of them so they never existed. And we're set in 2044. Now, the setup is, you shoot the person, they have silver bars attached to them, and that's basically their pay. And they go out, they do drugs, they speed around in their expensive vehicles, they do all that. They just live reckless lives, because when you're a looper, you sign up for basically only being able to live 30 years, because sooner or later, your loop gets closed and you're sent obviously you don't know because there's a bag over their head, but you're sent your future self and you kill them and you get gold bars. And then basically in that 30-year gap between when you get from here to there is what you have to spend your money on and do whatever you want with. Because obviously they just can't have those loose ends lying around, so so he leads a very tedious life. He goes in the morning, he does the kill, he goes to the diner with Tracy Toms and gets coffee, and then he goes out and does drugs with Paul Dano and drives around and does the whole party thing, goes out and bangs Piper Perabo, wakes up the next morning, and it's just over and over again. A loop, if you will. So anyway, we're introduced to a whole lot of great characters. The characters in this movie really make it, apart from the awesome setup and the really creative original setup. We have Seth, who is Paul Dano, who's basically his best friend. And he introduces us to, apparently in the future, telekinesis is a fad. And some people just have it, and they use it to basically pick up women. And that's basically all it's used for. He says the line, when it was first discovered, we thought we were going to have superheroes. Instead, it's just a bar trick. And so Seth just, nonchalantly makes, a coin float just to show off. Now, the interesting thing about Seth's character is very early in this movie, we get a scene that is downright frightening. And it's ingenious. Seth messes up and recognizes Seth's loop is closed, and he sent his older self. But the trouble is he's singing through the bag over his head, so Seth knows that it's him. So he panics and lets him go. So Abe, the boss, who is Jeff Daniels, who is awesome, we'll talk about him in a second, basically orders him to be found. They find him, and obviously he goes to hang out with Joe. And he keeps him in his safe, but he confesses to Abe where he is. And of course, Abe has this great line where he says, now we know you're hiding him, you just need to tell us where he is. Now, I know, you're expecting us to break your fingers with a hammer or something, but I'm going to diffuse that tension right now, because that's not going to happen. And he says, now don't worry about Seth, we're just going to rough him up a little bit. So, after he tells Joe, just go to kill an hour, we're going to rough him up a little bit, he says the line, call the doctor. And we get this insane scene where we don't see them go get Seth. We just see older Seth running around trying to escape. And then his fingers start to disappear. And what they're doing, and then his nose starts to disappear. And we just see, the bone. And what they're doing is they have taken Seth and they are surgically removing his body parts of his younger self. So his older self is just gradually falling apart. And it's really sick and really twisted, but really, really awesome and effective. And when he's down to basically just his torso and his head, they just shoot him and get it over with. And then we get that shot in the background of the rest of younger Seth's body just under a bloody sheet. That scene is wild. And then we're introduced to one of our villains, who is Kid Blue. Who I really like this character. He's like that really wily villain. He's basically the henchman, but he's like one of the wildest characters in the movie. He's the loose cannon, even though he's like a total fuck up. The interesting thing about Kid Blue I want to talk about, but first I gotta talk about Abe. Abe worked with the mob, basically, and he's from the future, but they sent him back here to basically run the city and be in control. And Jeff Daniels' deliveries here are amazing. Like when he talks about, when he's making fun of Joe for wearing ties and suits, and he's like saying, I don't know why you young kids, wear those ties, why don't you, this is the future, why don't you wear like a glowing thing around your neck or something? And when he's talking about, Joe is learning French throughout the movie because he wants to go to France once his loop closes. And he mentions this to Abe, and Abe doesn't say anything. And then they get to start talking about time travel. And just right in mid-thought, he cuts himself off and just says, this time travel shit just fries your brain like an egg. Why the fuck French? And then the line everybody loves with, you should really go to China. And it's like, I want to go to France. I'm from the future. You should go to China.
Your delivery there sounds like Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Oh man, Philip Seymour Hoffman would rock this part. But
totally agreed.
Jeff Daniels is brilliant though, as he often is. He doesn't get near enough credit. Since the newsroom, he has been getting credit, but he's long deserved credit.
We'll be talking about him on Versus soon.
Now, here's the thing. The theory about Kid Blue that I heard once, I don't think it's ever been confirmed, and I think there's some things to contradict it, but it's still something to think about. There's a theory that Kid Blue is the young version of Abe.
It's possible.
And here's the things you can look at. Like I said, I'm not quite sure the things to contradict it. I'm sure if you look closely you can find stuff, but as far as things on the surface, Kid Blue is now, and even though Abe is here, Abe is from the future. And secondly, every time Kid Blue is in his office, he's always seems either really upset that he let him down, or he's trying really, really hard to live up to Abe's expectations. And whenever he can't, or whenever he fucks up, it really, really devastates him. Like he's letting himself down. And then there's the fact that even though Kid Blue is always messing up, and Abe is always down his throat, Abe never kills him. He smashes his hand with a hammer once, and that's all he does. He never, like, outright punishes him the way he would other people. Because if the theory's true, if he kills Kid Blue, then he's gonna disappear. Now, of course, this whole thing would have been settled as far as, we would have known if Kid Blue was killed and then Abe just disappeared, but we don't know because Abe dies before Kid Blue does, so I guess we'll never know. But that theory has always been... Because I saw it the first time and I didn't think about it, and then before I saw it the second time I heard about that theory, and it seems to really work.
Yeah, I can see that.
Especially since when Kid Blue finds Abe's body, he goes in like... he looks shattered, and then he goes into like a vengeful rage and tracks Joe down immediately. Like he's practically avenging himself.
Yeah.
So, it's certainly a possibility, I think. But like I said, you probably have your nitpickers in there that find, these tiny little things that could contradict it. But, then there's, let's see. Okay, the brilliant thing about this is the fact that Bruce Willis is basically the star. Like, he's first credited, he's here, he's the face of the movie. All the stuff I've just talked about happens before Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis comes in half an hour in. And all of this great stuff has already happened.
Yeah.
And this is when the movie really starts to take off. I guess I should go ahead and mention this now because it's something everybody talks about. Nah, I'm not a fan of the makeup either. I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt would have done just fine looking like Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And people would have been able to buy him as Bruce Willis. I think the makeup was a lot more distracting than it was helping.
Yeah.
And Bruce Willis rocks in this movie.
Yes.
Because, once again, like in 12 Monkeys, he's got so much to do. Because there's, he's got the great, authoritative, superior figure where he's talking about, they're in the diner and he's basically taking on as the old wise one, and how young Joe is obviously the stupid one because he hasn't got the 30 years that older Joe has. And there's this really, really brilliant scene where we see it play out, where we learn how older Joe got here. Older Joe had to get here because of having been killed, basically. Because we see Joe kill older Joe, and then obviously Joe goes through the 30 years and turns into Bruce Willis gradually, and then as Bruce Willis is sent back to be killed by Joe, and that's when he stops himself from being killed. When you've seen the movie a couple of times, it's easier to keep up with, but explaining it sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. But it's a really, really cool concept, how we see the whole thing play out. So, yeah. Now, a big thing here with Willis's performance is obviously given the plot. The plot involves, there's a tyrant in the future called the Rainmaker, and he's the one, the mystery that's been going around is why everybody's loops are suddenly closing all at once. And it's because the Rainmaker is basically closing them all at the same time. So older Joe is trying to come back and stop himself from being killed by his younger self, so he can go find the Rainmaker as a kid and kill him before he can wreak havoc on the future. So, a large portion of this movie is Bruce Willis going around shooting kids.
Yeah.
But he's human about it. Because the first time he does it, he breaks down. And it's a really, heart-wrenching scene. You kind of almost don't expect it. Because Joe comes off so cold-blooded sometimes. But that's when you realize, But then by the end of the movie, he's practically the star of a monster movie. The score gets dark when he rises out of the field. Now, and of course, not only does he get to be sensitive Bruce Willis, and not only does he get to be authoritative Bruce Willis, he gets to be the Bruce Willis that gets a big-ass gun and goes and kills an entire building of people. With blood covering his face, he takes everybody in the place out. That boy must die. I will kill that boy no matter what. This is awesome, and I think this will go down as one of his more underrated performances. Because, like I said, the whole movie is so awesome around him, you almost forget he's the star of it. Because so much awesomeness has happened before he even enters it. Okay. We've reached this now.
Yeah.
I love Looper. I love Looper so much.
Yeah.
I really, really do. It was one of my favorite. It was one of my top 5 favorite movies of 2012, and 2012 was a great year for movies.
Yeah.
But, and I don't think this is common. I think most people are kind of on the other side of this, but this is the side of the argument I'm on. About an hour into Looper, it hits a major obstacle with me.
Yep.
I'm sure she's very nice. She's very, very beautiful. But I'm not much of a fan of Emily Blunt. Really. As an actress.
No.
I don't know. People love her. But there's just, I don't know. I just don't get that. And her character is introduced. And she's my pants stop here, my boots start here. I chop a stump. I'm hardcore woman. Her first scene, she has an axe and she's chopping the shit out of this stump, and then she hears Joe in the field, so she goes over with her ready shotgun and says, she's got the heavy southern accent, and I have shot and buried 3 fragments this week, and I will not hesitate to cut you the fuck in half. And she's supposed to be this really badass chick character, but I thought this character was really annoying. And I thought her scenes really bring the movie down. The movie is so magnificent for an hour. And then, I've seen the movie so many times, too. Every time I see the axe come down on that stump, I just wait. Oh, God. I know why her plot has to be here. I understand. Because she's the Rainmaker's mother.
Yep.
Obviously, she's important. But the character is so annoying. And every time she's on screen, I just can't deal with this movie. And the fact that her and Joe do a love story thing, I thought was totally pointless. Even though it kind of combats, when older Joe's talking about his wife in the diner, and younger Joe's resenting him and saying, well, you know what, I'll just make you forget her, and, I'll think of somebody else, or I'll make you, whatever. So, there's actually that time where, I guess it's to hint that Joe could fall in love with her, because Bruce Willis is thinking back to his wife, and while he's thinking of his wife, he starts to see flashes of Emily Blunt. So, it's basically younger Joe kind of combating him with his wife in that scenario, I guess. I don't know, but, yes, but, apart from that, and, oh my god, they actually do the cliche. Obviously, they play it up over and over and over again. She's the tough woman. They actually do the scene where he's injured and she's fixing it and he winces and she calls him a pussy. That line's actually in this movie, but that's okay because the movie picks itself right back up after all this. The scenes with the kid are pretty good, especially since they foreshadow the fact that he's the Rainmaker. They're the most important scenes in the movie, whether I like them or not. And the kid is really good. He's really, really sinister and can do you sense an evil inside him and something's going to go down. Something that really revamps the movie is the character of Jesse, who is played by the great actor Garrett Dillahunt, who is this deputized agent, or that's what he calls himself, who actually knows Joe. And he comes to the house and basically searches it. And this character is just, I don't even know what it is about him, because he doesn't even really do much, but he's just got this way about him. This character is really fascinating, and he's in only 2 scenes of the movie. And has the most hardcore death, I think, that's been in a movie in a long time. The scene where Sid's telekinesis goes way out of whack, and we see Jesse floating in the air, and we know something bad's about to happen, and the pressure's building, and we start to see blood kind of come out of him a little bit. And Emily Blunt knows what's going to happen, so she takes Joe, and they run out of the house, and we just see an explosion. And we don't go inside the house. We focus on the side of the house. We watch them go in, and we see them come out the back door. And while they're in the house, you hear Emily Blunt's voice go, "Oh my God." And in the middle of the house, between the front door and the back door, there's a window that's completely blown out, and it's just completely covered in Jesse's blood. Like, he just literally liquefied in that explosion. The violence in the movie is really hardcore. I'm kind of surprised it didn't get more, like, attention for that. Like, even just the mere shootings are, like, really graphic. But the thing I love about this movie is not only is it, obviously it's a very original, futuristic sci-fi movie, but what makes it so appealing, I think, is it's got so many elements of, like, old school thriller in it. Which I think is a really the way they balance it and the way it kind of ties together perfectly and makes this, you know, futuristic 2044. I just really love that about it. I love its style, I love its creativity, and its originality. That concept is awesome. Even if it takes a lot of exposition to get to, the concept is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And really, really well thought out. I wasn't much of a fan of Rian Johnson's other movies like Brick and The Brothers Bloom, but this is really... And he's getting 2 of the Star Wars movies, apparently.
Yes.
And this makes me okay with that.
Definitely.
It's just... I don't know that he can make a movie this good or this creative. I don't know how much he's got in him. Because I wouldn't... With movies like Brick is like some, like, old school gumshoe throwback, and The Brothers Bloom is like a caper movie. This is not what I expected from him next. But it's a fantastic movie, even if that character really, really bugs me. Then again, Pulp Fiction is my favorite movie of all time, and Mia Wallace bugs me, so I guess it doesn't always matter. And then you have the great ending where we have the action scenes are fantastic. And then you have the scenes where it's actually really, like, emotionally hitting when the way the Rainmaker is able to be stopped before he starts. It's not really a big thing, but it's got a huge emotional impact. And, you know, obviously ends with younger Joe killing himself so the older Joe, you know, won't kill him, or kill her, and start all of this. But, that always made me wonder, when young Joe killed himself and old Joe disappeared, did that bring back everybody that old Joe killed?
I think they're dead. Once they're dead, but there's a ways to look at it.
Having said that, when they're at the diner, old Joe says to young Joe, let's not talk about this time travel shit, because we'll be here all day. And we'll leave that at that.
It's a great way to put it, and a great way to end this, too.
So, I love 12 Monkeys. It's great from beginning to end. It doesn't have the annoying character like Emily Blunt in it. But Looper's great moments are so great. Like, okay, 12 Monkeys is great more consistently, but the great moments in Looper, I think, surpass the great moments in 12 Monkeys. So I think I'd just barely pick Looper over it.
Wow. That's going to shock a lot of you out there, most likely. Well, we've put it off a long time, and we've said that we were going to go gangster for a couple of weeks now, and next week we actually finally will, and there's nothing that's going to bump it, because I know what the schedule is for the rest of July. And you do too. And you guys will find out the weeks they come out. So, as always, hopefully you enjoyed AJ's movie reviews this week, and Ashley's Popcaster from Across the Pond segment yesterday. And hopefully you're enjoying your 4th of July weekend. If this is not your holiday, then hopefully you enjoyed your weekend. And wrestling content coming tomorrow, and all sorts of Halloween Horror Nights news as soon as I find out anything new. So, AJ, any parting words?